The end of the world wasn't announced with fire. It didn't come with alien ships shadowing the cities, or a sudden blinding flash of nuclear light. There were no sirens. There was no panic. It just stopped. I remember the morning of day one perfectly. I woke up at 7:00 a.m. The coffee machine was humming in the kitchen. The morning sunlight was cutting through the blinds. But something was fundamentally wrong with the air. It was the silence. I live right next to the interstate. For 10 years, the low mechanical drone of thousands of cars had been the soundtrack of my life, a permanent, vibrating hum. But that morning, the highway was dead. I walked out onto my balcony. The cars were still there, thousands of them perfectly aligned in their lanes, idling. The exhaust fumes were rising into the cold morning air. But the driver's seats were empty, the doors were closed, the seat belts were still buckled, but the people were simply gone. I checked my phone. No new messages, no news alerts. The internet was still up, running on automated servers, but the feeds were frozen. No one was typing, no one was broadcasting. I walked down into the street. I screamed until my throat bled. "Is anyone here?" The only answer I got was the echo of my own voice, bouncing off the glass and steel of the skyscrapers, slowly fading into the absolute terrifying quiet. 8 billion people, a race between one breath and the next. I was alone. Population. One. For the first few days, the ghost of humanity kept the world running. The automated systems did their jobs. The streetlights flickered on at dusk. The water pressure in the pipes remained steady. The grocery stores were fully stocked, bathed in the artificial glow of fluorescent lights. It felt like everyone was just playing an elaborate game of hide and seek. But machines need masters. On day 14, the grid finally died. I was sitting in a high-rise apartment I had claimed as a temporary base, reading a book by the light of a desk lamp. Then the lamp flickered, once, twice, and died. I looked out the massive glass window. I watched the blackout roll across the city like a wave of dark water. Sector by sector, neighborhood by neighborhood, the lights of civilization extinguished forever. The coal plants had run out of fuel. The nuclear reactors had automatically shut down in their fail-safe modes. The darkness that followed was something modern. Humans haven't experienced in over a century. It was an ancient, crushing blackness. And with the death of the grid, the real survival began. The water pump stopped. When I turned the faucet the next morning, there was a violent hiss of empty air, followed by a trickle of brown water, and then nothing. The refrigerators in every supermarket in the city began to warm. The smell, within a week, the smell of rotting meat and spoiling dairy became unbearable. I had to learn how to scavenge. I had to break into pharmacies to stockpile antibiotics. I had to siphon gasoline from abandoned cars into plastic jugs before the fuel went bad. The illusion of the modern world was gone. I was no longer a citizen of a city. I was an animal, foraging in a forest of concrete and glass. Nature wastes no time. By day 90, the city was already surrendering to the earth. Without the constant trampling of millions of feet, the weeds began to push through the cracks in the asphalt. Thick green vines began to crawl up the sides of the brick buildings, wrapping around the traffic lights that would never turn green again. The air changed. The thick layer of smog that had blanketed the city for decades disappeared entirely. The sky became a piercing, brilliant blue. The stars at night were so bright, so overwhelming, they almost looked fake. But the silence was broken. The animals were taking over. First, it was the birds. Millions of them nesting in the eaves of office buildings, their songs echoing through the empty financial districts. Then came the domestic pets. The dogs that had managed to break out of their homes began to form packs. They reverted to their wolf ancestors with terrifying speed. I learned to carry a weapon, not for people, but for the packs of starving golden retrievers and German shepherds that roamed the avenues. It is a profound psychological shock to realize you are no longer the top of the food chain. You are just a fragile sack of meat walking through a wilderness that happens to be made of steel. I moved my camp to the roof of a 5-story building. I hauled up hundreds of bags of soil. I broke open the roof panels and planted a garden. Potatoes, tomatoes, carrots. I set up rain catchers using massive plastic tarps. I was securing my water. I was securing my food. But I couldn't secure my mind. The isolation began to manifest as physical pain, an ache in the center of my chest. I caught myself having hour-long conversations with mannequins in department stores. I listened to the wind whistling through the elevator shafts, trying to convince myself it was the sound of a human voice. I was surviving the elements, but I was slowly losing the war against winter arrived like a predator. Without the ambient heat of millions of running engines, factories, and heating systems, the city froze. A thick blanket of white snow covered the abandoned cars, turning the highways into beautiful, silent, frozen rivers. I abandoned the high-rise. It was a glass refrigerator. I moved down into a small, windowless basement of a library. I built a crude wood stove out of a metal barrel and vented the pipe up through the street grate. For 2 months, I did not see the sun. I spent my days huddled next to the fire, wrapped in 5 layers of clothing, burning centuries of human knowledge just to stay warm. I burned encyclopedias, history books, philosophy texts. The irony wasn't lost on me. The accumulated wisdom of mankind, reduced to kindling to keep the last man alive for 1 more hour. The winter was the crucible. There were days when the fire would burn low, the temperature in the basement would drop below freezing, and the thought of simply letting the cold take me felt like a warm, comforting blanket. Why survive? Who was I surviving for? There was no one coming. There was no rescue. There was no future generation to inherit my struggles. But in the absolute deepest, darkest part of that winter, I realized something. Survival isn't about logic. It is a biological imperative. The blood in my veins demanded to keep flowing. The lungs in my chest demanded to keep expanding. I was the last observer of the universe. If I closed my eyes, humanity's entire story officially ended. I threw another book into the fire. I watched the pages turn to ash, and I decided to live. Day 365. The snow finally melted. The water flowed down the avenues, washing away the dirt and the debris of the old world. I stepped out of the library basement and walked into the sunlight. The warmth on my face felt like a blessing. The city is unrecognizable now. It is a spectacular, overgrown monument to a forgotten species. Wildflowers are blooming in the intersections. Deer are grazing in the parks. The air smells like wet earth and blooming jasmine. I don't look for other people anymore. The frantic, terrifying desperation of the first few months is gone. The aching loneliness has hardened into something else. Acceptance. I am no longer a modern man. I am the caretaker of a quiet earth. I walk to the rooftop garden I planted in the summer. The sprouts have survived the freeze. They are pushing up through the dark soil, reaching for the sun, a tiny fragile promise of life. I look out over the silent, green metropolis. There are no sirens. There are no wars. There is no money, no politics, no hatred. The world did not end, only we did. And as I stand here, listening to the wind, rustling through the leaves of a tree, growing out of a cracked sidewalk, I realize something profound. The earth is healing. The great silence is not empty. It is peaceful. And for the first time in 65 days, I am okay.